Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mikula Wright, and I'm the CEO for the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. I was recently fortunate to attend the COP26 in Glasgow with Sophia Cheng from Cathay Financial and participated in Taiwan Day. And I was really encouraged by the progress that's been happening in the last 2 years, and I met many of the people who are working on making Taiwan a regional leader. Heard some great examples of how Taiwan is creating effective policy that can attract investment in renewable energy. And this is something that can be used and talked about and replicated across the region. And of course, we really welcome the Taiwan's 2050 net zero emissions target being enshrined into domestic law. And that will really ensure that Taiwan remains competitive with its regional peers. I'm really keen to offer some reflections on the implications from the recent COP for investors and what investors are looking at now in terms of their climate implementation across their portfolios. So what really stood out to me at COP was the presence of investors in the finance community. Finance Day occurred immediately after the World Leaders Summit, which goes to the increasing importance and role of the finance sector in investing in the transition to zero carbon economies of the future. There are now net zero initiatives that cover the entire investment and finance sector value chain, and the expectations on the whole sector are increasing. And accountability and transparency was one of the key outcomes of COP that is only going to increase, not just for investors and financiers, but for governments and industry alike. It's also getting more competitive for investors, with increasing numbers signing up to net zero initiatives, which shows that they're a part of the solutions for clients and governments. To me, COP really felt like a mega responsible investment conference, but with politicians, regulators and civil society there as well. And this is really a significant change from 5 years ago. Many of the new commitments and announcements that were made, including the coal phase down, methane reduction, deforestation, and other significant policy announcements from Asian governments, including updated 2030 targets and NDCs, will really help to accelerate and pave the way for investors to fund the transition and create the products to invest in. And of course, working with companies who are at the forefront of this with their product innovation and including technology. And this is where Taiwan can play a really significant role. Taiwan, however, like all countries, needs to do more and needs to do it faster. And I hope this event really assists you in being able to do this. For many Asian markets, the discussion is really transitioning from ambition to implementation now, and attracting private capital into green industries and infrastructure with really strong domestic policy settings will be critical to achieving many countries' climate goals. This is why investors are calling for detailed policy settings at sector levels so they can see the path for their future investment to support the transition. And we had a record 733 investors calling on global governments to increase their ambition so that investors can invest and support this transition with their capital. So how are investors thinking about implementation of climate risks and opportunities? So one of the ways they do this is obviously by engaging with corporates. And some of you here are in initiatives like the Climate Action 100 Plus. And so in Asia, we cover 33 of the largest emitters in the region, and asking them to have the governance oversight, emissions reductions targets and disclosure against the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, so disclosure of climate risk. And out of these 33 in Asia, 14 have now committed to net zero by 2050, including all 3 Taiwanese companies, Honhai, Formosa and China Steel. And so this is fantastic, and this is a great signal for your supply chains and for investors. But what investors are asking for now is, what are your 2030 and your interim targets, so they can see how you're clearly planning your transition through your organisation and through your assets. What is the capital expenditure that you might be putting towards this transition, and how much of this capex will really tell investors how serious you are and how you might compare to some of your peers. We have an engagement program with utilities in Asia as well. And given that this sector is so crucial to the global transition, this is really an additional key part of our engagement with Asian utilities across the region to enable that transition to low carbon economies. So in terms of how investors are incorporating climate risks and opportunities into their portfolios, we're working with our global partners, and we've recently developed the Investor Climate Action Plans. And this is a guide and a framework to help investors better prepare their portfolios to address climate risks. So the Investor Climate Action Plans, or ICAPs, has 4 key pillars, with governance sitting across the top of that. So the pillars are corporate engagement, which I just talked about previously, investment, how investors manage systemic climate risks in their portfolios and enable this transition by shifting capital to the businesses that are creating value to succeed in a net zero future, policy advocacy to unlock the policies that can allow more capital to flow, and then, of course, the disclosure of climate risk in a portfolio. And the ICAPs is a guide and a framework that is helpful to all investors, no matter where they are on their climate integration journey. And it's a self-assessment framework with a guidance document that takes you from beginner level right up to net zero initiatives and commitments, or wherever you might be in between. And I'm really delighted to let you know that the ICAPs framework has just been released in simplified Chinese as well. So hopefully that's useful for you. But as I mentioned, there's a spectrum of investors, and we're the beginning, but we're now seeing many make these net zero commitments. And we have a specific net zero asset owner commitment and net zero asset manager initiatives, where they're committing to align a percentage of their portfolio to net zero and then increase that over time in a similar way to the Paris Agreement ratchet mechanism until 100% of investor assets are ultimately net zero. There's annual reporting to ensure transparency and accountability of investors. And I really encourage you to take a look at some of these frameworks and these initiatives. And we're happy to have a conversation with you about how this might apply to you and how you could use these tools and resources. So there's a lot to do. There's some incredible momentum that we've seen come out of COP. And we really need to take this momentum forward and turn it into implementation in all levels for investors and their portfolios, in working with industry, and of course talking to government policymakers and regulators as well. So every action you take every day matters and it makes a difference. So I ask you to do more because every little action will help us address the issue of climate change, which ultimately affects us all. Thank you so much. Enjoy the conference.